There's this very strange story in Genesis 38 which sticks out like a sore thumb. It honestly feels more like a Game of Thrones episode, but it's my opinion that if we actually portrayed much of these biblical stories as they get described in the Bible, it would make an amazing Netflix series. Right in the middle of the story of Joseph being sold into slavery, this chapter about his brother Judah appears, and boy, does it get juicy. If we've been paying attention, it becomes pretty obvious that the author or authors of Genesis have a mind that is constantly on incest and sexual acts. Genesis literally starts off with a bang. The curse from God relates to sex, leading to pain in childbirth, Genesis 3. Then we see gods coming down and having sex with beautiful women, producing giants and men of renown, Genesis 6. We see inspiration in the mythical tales of Enoch. The flood hero Noah's son Ham sees his father's nakedness, which has clear sexual implications, and causes Noah to curse Ham's offspring, Genesis 9. Abraham has to pawn his wife off as his sister because he was afraid that they may kill him for her, and Pharaoh took her for his wife, till Yahweh inflicted diseases on Pharaoh's household. Abraham was treated well on behalf of her, as though he was pimping her out. When children aren't born by Sarah, she makes Abraham sleep with her slave Hagar, which ends pretty badly between Sarah and Hagar, Genesis 16. God makes a covenant with Abraham, which is enacted by circumcising the foreskin of the penis, Genesis 17. God promises to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, where two divine angels visit Lot and are rushed by crowds of men who want to have sex with them. This treatment of strangers is the ultimate sin. So the angels blind the crowds and save Lot and his family. Though Lot's wife looked back, turning into a pillar of salt, later in that same story, Lot's daughters get their father drunk and have sex with him, getting pregnant, Genesis 19. Sounds like Abraham played the she's my sister card again by trying to pimp his wife Sarah to King Abimelech in the next scene, but God saves him from sleeping with her, Genesis 20. Abraham sent his servant to find his son Isaac a wife from among Abraham's family, not from the Canaanites, Genesis 24. Sarah died at 127 years of age, and Abraham was 10 years older than Sarah. Abraham took another wife and had several more kids after Sarah with a woman named Keturah, till he dies at age 175, Genesis 25. Looks like Isaac picked up his pimp tricks from his father by claiming Rebekah was his sister to the same King Abimelech of the Philistines. He was afraid for his life because she was beautiful, and of course, the language of her possibly having slept with other men is mentioned in Genesis 26. There is this code, or should I say law, through the thread of Genesis thus far. Avoid marrying Canaanite women, Genesis 28. Quote, "So Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him. Then he commanded him, 'Do not marry a Canaanite woman.'" End quote. Jacob falls in love with a beautiful girl named Rachel and gets tricked by her dad into sleeping with her older sister, Leah. These stories are really wild, Genesis 29. Now Jacob has two sister wives and some of their slaves as wives as well to produce offspring. Rachel was not able to have kids and took a magical mandrake plant as an aphrodisiac. Next thing you know, she's pregnant with Joseph, Genesis 30. Jacob's daughter Dinah was raped by Prince of Shechem, and he loved her, so their tribe made a pact to circumcise. But little did they know Dinah's brothers were planning to wipe them out, and so they did just that, Genesis 34. The next scene takes place with Judah in Genesis 38 and God killing two of his sons for not doing right in the eyes of God. Keep in mind, Genesis continues this theme with Joseph having to run from Potiphar's wife in Egypt. But let's take a closer look at the wild stuff in Genesis 38 with Judah, Judah's family, and Tamar's plan. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named Er. She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah, to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira, the Abdullamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance in Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given him as wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face, not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law. He went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your sill and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Abdullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her." Besides, the men who lived there said, "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here." Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughing stock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said. And she added, "See if you recognize whose sill and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there was twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you have broken out." And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah, connecting the lustful dots inspired by Dr. Kipp Davis. Dr. Kipp Davis recorded a session on MythVision before about this strange chapter on Judah and his household, expressing that it is far too many parallels to David's stories. Our goal will be to show you there is a narrative connection between Genesis 38 and David. We won't be getting bogged down into the historicity so much or dating of the stories. Dr. Davis does think there may be a historical memory to the David saga and his household, though what we have may be polished or propagandistic. However, he is completely open to these narratives being completely ahistorical. Let's investigate the possible literary interdependence by matching parallels or contrasting elements to see if a pattern emerges. It's important to note that in Genesis 49, 8-12, we see hints that King David would rule as a descendant of Judah when Jacob prophesied over his sons. Connecting Judah and David is significant. The Davidic story also describes a struggle between the northern and southern kingdoms, which Judah, the south, just so happens to carry the name of this patriarch. We have shown that individuals often in Genesis represent nations or even tribes. Judah may ultimately represent the southern kingdom, and his story may have been penned by scribes from the southern kingdom as an etiological myth. The documentary hypothesis and other hypotheses describe northern stories or scribes from the north, which may be the Samaritans if one's thinking that these were written later, and southern Judahite scribes. It's important to note that Judah and Joseph are the only two sons of Jacob to get their own stories in Genesis. Remember in our last installment, we were making connections between Jacob and David. Well, we're going to be doing something like that here today as well. Judah got his firstborn heir a wife named Tamar, which was a child of a Canaanite, and we see another story later with David's son Amnon, who fell in love with his sister Tamar, eventually raping her. 2 Samuel 13, 1-33. The chapters before this one in 2 Samuel describe David killing Uriah the Hittite and taking Bathsheba for a wife, having a child which God would kill because of his father's sins. This chapter in 2 Samuel takes place with David's firstborn son Amnon and his sister, David's daughter, Tamar. Let's read this passage to grasp the context of the narrative. Amnon and Tamar. In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Amnon became so obsessed with his sister Tamar that he made himself ill. She was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. Now Amnon had an advisor named Jonadab, son of Shemaiah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, "Why do you, the king's son, look so skinny, haggard, morning after morning? Won't you tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I'm in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." "Go to bed and pretend to be ill," Jonadab said. "When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight, so I may watch her and then eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon laid down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, "I would like my sister Tamar to come and make me some special bread in my sight, so I may eat from her hand." David sent word to Tamar at the palace, "Go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him." So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was laying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, and made the bread in his sight and baked it. Then she took the pan and served him the bread, but he refused to eat. "Send everyone out of here," Amnon said. So everyone left him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food here into my bedroom, so I may eat it from your hand." And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, "Come to bed with me, my sister." "No, my brother," she said to him. "Don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you." But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." "No," she said to him, "sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you have already done to me." But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, "Get this woman out of my sight and bolt the door after her." So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing an ornate robe, coat of many colors, for this was the kind of garment of virgin daughters of the king wore. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornate robe she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has that Amnon, your brother, been with you? Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart." And Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. When King David heard all this, he was furious, and Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. A few verses later, Absalom kills Amnon 2 years after the scene. 2 Samuel 11 through 1 Kings 2, succession narrative. The sons of David making attempts to take over the throne of their father. Having sex is like marking your authority and territory. Sex is a sign of authority, of kingship. The story of Amnon is ultimately a theme of succession to the throne. Professor Don C. Benjamin makes this case. Dr. Kipp Davis supposes that this narrative could be a critique of the Davidic and Solomon political kingship by writing this criticism of the story. If there was a historical David, and he rallied these groups into his rulership, these authors could very well be people who were pro-kingship, but their guy didn't get the job. Or these people were against the ruling of a king. Judges 9:6-15 seems to be a critique of kingship. Is the story of David's succession narratives being constructed during David and Solomon's lifetime, if one supposes they existed? If this is a southern Judahite story, then it's a critique of the house of David, which is against the institution. If this is a northern story, then this is a critique of the Davidic line and the critique of Hiram from Tyre, who furnished the resources to building the Solomon temple. This could be in line with the anti-Mesopotamian trope, because you have a guy from Tyre who furnished the resources for the temple. All the major craftsmen of this temple are from Tyre. In the narrative, we see Amnon being fed by his sister, which could be a euphemism for a sexual act. Sometimes the Hebrew Bible associates eating food with sex. We also notice a key Hebrew word mentioned in both 2 Samuel 13:8 and Genesis 37:3 with the coat of many colors worn by Tamar and Joseph. This Hebrew word pasim, I may be mispronouncing it, but you see it on the screen, is only used in these two places biblically, strengthening the connection between the Joseph and Judah narratives and David's succession narratives. One of the major points of the succession narrative is to eventually set up the throne for the youngest brother Solomon with King David. It appears the case may be similar with the Judah and Joseph narratives for setting up Joseph as the favored, though there is a nod to Judah in Genesis 49. These pieces of evidence may be evidence of a northern scribe or that northern traditions came down to the south in Judah. I highly recommend watching the stream with Dr. Davis on MythVision, which will be in the description of this video, as well as subscribe to his YouTube channel for further information. Dr. Davis, as well as Dr. Craig Y.S. Ho, both play a significant role in connecting these stories. Let it begin. In the audacious Game of Thrones of yore, Absalom wasn't one to play by the rules or care for niceties. This renegade prince, in a bold move to dethrone and humiliate his father, took liberties with 10 of David's concubines. You see, in those times, a king's harem wasn't just about romance. It was a symbol of his political clout and dominion. So by claiming the king's harem, one essentially claimed his crown. And here's the poetic irony. The very rooftop where David's scandal with Bathsheba unfolded became the stage for Absalom's audacious act of raping his father's 10 concubines. 2 Samuel 16:22. Check out these parallels in the Genesis 38 narrative and David's story. You have Judah equaling David, if you're comparing these narratives. Hiram equals Hiram. Bathsheba equals Bathsheba. Equals the deceased firstborn son of David and Bathsheba, which God killed, just like he killed in Genesis 38. Onan equals Amnon. Shelah equals Solomon, who are the youngest sons. Shelah the youngest of Judah, Solomon the youngest of David, and Tamar equals Tamar. Judah and David's stories are like two sides of a coin, or perhaps a plot twist in a riveting drama series. For Judah, it's a tale of tragedy, first with the demise of his sons and Onan, followed by a spicy scandal with his daughter-in-law. David, on the other hand, flips the script. His steamy affair sets the stage, leading to the tragic end of his sons, Amnon and Absalom. It's like watching a movie in reverse. And just when you thought the parallels ended, enter Adonijah, whose lustful misadventures and eventual downfall echo the schemes of these tales. Meanwhile, Judah's son Shelah dodges the tragic fate of his brothers, but only to serve the plot twist where Tamar seeks her revenge. So if you're ever in a biblical book club, here's a fun observation. Reading Judah's story is like rewinding David's, and vice versa. Problems in the family. The narratives of Judah and the David-Bathsheba affair, referenced in 2 Samuel 11, share striking parallels. Here's a breakdown. Both tales revolve around a forbidden romance that results in a child. Following these affairs, there's a distinct period of silence. For Judah, it's 3 months, while David's duration remains unspecified. It's evident that during this time, Judah wishes for the event's memory to fade, whereas David seeks to conceal his actions. Interestingly, when confronted with others' transgressions, both men exhibit strong moral outrage. Judah proclaims, "Take her out and let her be burned," while David declares, "The man who has done this deserves to die," as per 2 Samuel 12:5. An intriguing similarity is the names of their wives, Bathsheba and Bathsheba. Additionally, it's noteworthy that neither woman was originally an Israelite, sending words to Judah. David. In both Genesis 38:25 and 2 Samuel 11:5, there's a compelling similarity in how the news of pregnancy is conveyed. Genesis 38:25, the message is sent to the father-in-law, stating, "By the man whom these things belong, I am with child." 2 Samuel 11:5, Bathsheba sends a message to David, simply stating, "I am with child." This parallelism has previously been highlighted as pregnancy narratives, emphasizing that such stories typically revolve around the birth of significant children. What makes this parallel particularly intriguing is its rarity. The act of sending a message to announce a pregnancy, coupled with the phrase, "I am with child," is exclusive to these two narratives in the entire Hebrew Bible. This presents a remarkable thematic and linguistic symmetry, further exemplified by the mirrored phrasing, "lustful men, seductive women." The narratives of Judah and Tamar and David and Bathsheba both pivot on the theme of female-initiated seduction. Intriguingly, both women are of foreign origin. Tamar adopts the guise of a shrine prostitute, while Bathsheba opts for a more audacious display of nudity. Bathsheba's role is more complex than a cursory reading might suggest. Some scholars think Bathsheba willingly took the risk of being observed bathing on the rooftop, but Dr. Kipp thinks Bathsheba would have no ultimate say in this matter against the lustful king. If this is a reality, it's noteworthy that both Judah and David are portrayed in moments of ethical vulnerability as they embark on these affairs. Furthermore, each woman plays a pivotal role in the lineage of their respective families. Domestic displacement, from father's house to brother's house. In Genesis 38:11, we observe Tamar retreating to her father's house, while in 2 Samuel 13:20, another Tamar, same name, finds refuge in her brother Absalom's house. After a traumatic event, this juxtaposition has intrigued scholars who discern it as a manifestation of the reoccurring motif, a foreign woman entwined with death. In the narrative involving Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar is directed to her father's abode following the demise of Onan, who shirks his duty to her after Er's death. Conversely, David's daughter Tamar is compelled to abandon her paternal home due to a grievous violation by her half-brother. The parallels, both thematic and linguistic, are palpable. Name association. Both aggrieved parties share the name Tamar. Sexual transgressions. Each Tamar faces a sexual affront by a male relative. One is neglected, the other violated. Domestic dislocation. Both women are necessitated to relocated from their usual residences to another familial home. Vindication at a festival. Intriguingly, both narratives converge at a sheep shearing festival where vindication unfolds. This quadruple alignment is not merely coincidental, but serves as a unique and profound exploration of familial dynamics and gendered transgressions in biblical texts. Evil in the sight of Yahweh. Genesis 38:7-10. 2 Samuel 12:9. This very unique literary situation appears in both accounts, from widow's garment to a torn robe. In one ancient story, Tamar switches out of her widow's outfit to confront Judah, signaling she's ready to stand up for herself. In another tale, Absalom's sister, also named Tamar, tears her special robe after a tragic event with Amnon. This robe was a symbol of her purity, and tearing it showed the world her pain. Interestingly, while Judah's daughter-in-law acts quickly after her wardrobe change, Absalom takes 2 years to respond to his sister's ordeal. Yet, in the story, Tamar's act of tearing her robe and what follows happen in quick succession, emphasizing the urgency of her situation. In both stories, a change in clothing isn't just about fashion. It's a powerful statement about their life-changing moments. Sheep shearing festivals, a tale of 2 Tamars. Here's something interesting. Both stories of Tamar, from different parts of the ancient texts, have a unique twist. Each Tamar gets her moment of justice during a sheep shearing festival. Now, what's fascinating is that there's no other story in the Hebrew Bible where a woman who's been wronged in such a way gets her justice during this kind of event. This isn't just a random similarity. It's so specific that it makes you wonder if the writer of one story might have known about the other. It's like finding 2 different books with a super unique plot twist and thinking, did one author get inspired by the other? And of course, I think it's clear that one is looking at the other. Obsessed with sex. In Genesis 38:18, the narrative describes an intimate encounter resulting in Tamar conceiving Perez and Zerah. Notably, Perez becomes a forebear of David. Similarly, in 2 Samuel 12:24, David's union with Bathsheba leads to the birth of Solomon, who succeeds David. This presents a symmetrical lineage. Perez leads to David, and David leads to Solomon. The narrative of Genesis 38, despite its brevity, employs a specific phrasal verb related to sexual activity 6 times. While such repetition might seem superfluous, it underscores a thematic emphasis. The story of Judah revolves around unconventional sexual relations and their ramifications. Intriguingly, the Davidic narrative also employs analogous phrasal verbs, further highlighting the thematic parallels between the 2 accounts. Widow's garments to mourning attire. In the narratives under consideration, deception emerges as a central motif. Both principal characters, Judah and David, find themselves deceived. Judah by Tamar and David by the astute woman of Tekoa, acting under Joab's guidance. A pivotal element in these acts of deception is the transformation of attire. For both Tamar and the woman of Tekoa, clothing isn't merely functional but instrumental, serving as a critical prop in their orchestrated performances. Sexual restraint and lessons learned. Upon recognizing Tamar's true identity, Judah ceases his intimate relationship with her. David's situation, however, is more nuanced. It remains uncertain whether age has diminished his sexual vigor, as seen with Abishag, or if the tumultuous events of his life and the perils of illicit affairs have made him more circumspect in his later years. His attendants, perhaps with well-meaning intentions, propose that the company of a young maiden might rejuvenate him. Yet, the narrative subtly distinguishes between capability and choice. It doesn't state that David couldn't engage with Abishag, but rather that he chose not to. In this light, Abishag emerges as a Bathsheba redux, but with David now embodying wisdom and restraint. Both narratives underscore a transformative journey for the protagonist, with the sexual connotation of to know serving as a poignant linguistic parallel in both accounts. Perez and Solomon, ancestral echoes and unexpected legacies. Drawing parallels between Perez and Solomon offers a study in unexpected lineages. Perez emerges as an unforeseen descendant of Judah, especially from the patriarch's perspective. Notably, none of Judah's 3 sons directly linked to David's lineage. In a parallel vein, Solomon's ascension to the throne is equally unanticipated. Despite being younger than his brothers, Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah, who theoretically held stronger claims to the throne, Solomon emerges as David's successor. Each of these elder siblings meets untimely demises, preventing their potential reigns. This triad of thwarted heirs in David's lineage mirrors the trio of Judah's unsuccessful sons. Perez and Solomon then serve as narrative counterparts. Both are born to astute and resolute mothers, and both emerge as unexpected torchbearers of their respective lineages. While Solomon's eventual succession resolves the lingering question of Davidic succession, Perez's birth, in the succinct narrative, of Genesis 38 similarly quells uncertainties surrounding the continuation of Judah's line. There are identical names, thematic similarities, genealogical connections, and verbal phrases unique to these two sections of the biblical narrative exclusively. The conclusion we should draw is that Genesis 38 is fiction based off of the David narrative. We are not interested in this video into diving in whether or not David's narrative is historical or not. But for all of our purposes today, it's obvious the Genesis narrative is imitating David's succession story, fiction or history. We have a really good hunch of Genesis 38 being a fiction based off of David's story. For those who are desperate in assuming both stories are historical, see Dr. Craig Y.S. Ho's paper, The Stories of the Family Troubles of Judah and David, a study of their literary links. However, if the Judah story and the David story were originally two independent traditions, there are just too many coincidences to be explained away. To put it differently, the story of Judah and Tamar very probably has no prior traditio-historical existence before being written. It was derived from the David story. This conclusion, whether we want to draw it or not, and however radical it may be, is inescapable. What if the Genesis story is a fiction which highlights both the David story and potentially reflects other historical ideas found in Herodotus? Would this pique your interest? Some of these elements I'm going to bring up do not have literary parallels as far as I can see to the David succession narrative. I will be using Dr. Philip Wagenbaum's examples from Herodotus in his book Argonauts of the Desert. Genesis 38 provides a detailed account of Judah's lineage. Judah fathers 3 sons with a Canaanite woman, Onan, and Shelah. Er's marriage to Tamar is short-lived due to his untimely death. Following the levirate law referenced in Genesis 38:8 and Deuteronomy 25:5-10, Onan is instructed to wed Tamar. However, Onan, reluctant to father children with Tamar, practices coitus interruptus, leading to divine retribution and his death. Seeking to protect his remaining son, Judah hesitates to arrange another marriage with Tamar. In a twist, Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute and seduces Judah. This union results in her pregnancy. As evidence of Judah's paternity, she secures his signet, cord, and staff. Remember these. Genesis 38:18. It's worth noting that such a relationship between a father-in-law and daughter-in-law is forbidden as per Leviticus 18:15. In a broader cultural context, Herodotus posts the Tower of Babylon account sheds light on Babylonian customs, including ritual prostitution practices and the traditional attire of Babylonian men. These elements are completely absent from the David story, which Genesis 38 is modeled after. Their boats, then, are like that, and they wear clothing like this, a linen tunic that reaches the foot, then over it another tunic of wool one puts on. A small white cloak wraps around and wears native sandals, pretty near to the Boeotian slippers. Moreover, since they grow their hair long, they bind up their heads with turbans, and they're anointed over their whole body. Each has a signet ring and a handmade staff, and on top of each staff is fashioned either an apple or a rose or a lily or an eagle or something else, because their law is not to have a staff without a device. Quite the most shameful of the Babylonians' laws is this: every native woman must sit in the shrine of Aphrodite once in her life and have intercourse with a foreign man, many thinking unbefitting themselves to be mixed with all others, inasmuch as they are high-minded because of wealth, on chariots and covered carriages, drive to the shrine and stand, and a large retinue follows them behind, while the greater number act this way. In Aphrodite's precinct, many women sit down with a wreath of string around their heads. Some go forward and some go back, and straight as a line, ways that go through to the women extend every direction along the roads, through which the foreigners go and make their selection. Whenever a woman sits there, she departs to her house, not before one of the foreigners should throw silver onto her knees and have intercourse with her outside the shrine. And with this, throwing it on her, he has to say this much: I invoke over you the goddess Mylitta. The Assyrians call Aphrodite Mylitta. Herodotus 1, 195, 199. In the concluding sections of Histories, Herodotus narrates an episode where Xerxes becomes entangled in a romantic liaison with his daughter-in-law. Their clandestine affairs unveiled when she is found in possession of an item that unmistakably belongs to Xerxes. That time indeed, while he was in Sardis, he was in love with a woman of Mythestes, and that while she was there, so when in respect to him, while he kept sending messages forth, she had the power not to be worked on utterly, and he would not bring violence forth out of respect for his brother Mythestes. And the same thing was holding for his woman also, for she well knew that she would not obtain violence thereupon. Indeed, Xerxes, keeping himself from all else, was bringing about that following marriage for his son Darius, of the daughter of that woman and Mythestes, because he thought that he would take hold of her more if he did that. So having betrothed and performed the deeds that were used according to law, he was driving off to Susa. Then, when he had come thither and brought for himself into his own place for Darius, thus indeed, as he seized for himself from the woman of Mythestes, so he, after having changed himself, was in love in obtaining the woman of Darius, Mythestes' daughter, and that woman's name was Artanate. So time going forth, it became thoroughly known by inquiry in a manner like this. Amestris, Xerxes' woman, completely wove a robe, large and embroidered, as well as worth beholding, and gave it to Xerxes. And he, having taken pleasure in it, cast it around himself and went to Artanate's side. Then, having taken pleasure in that one, also he bade her ask for whatever she wanted to become hers in return for services rendered to him, for she would obtain, if she asked. So, because for it had to come out badly for her, with her whole house thereupon, she said to Xerxes, "Will you give me whatever I ask from you?" And he, thinking that she would ask for herself anything rather, promised and swore. Then she, when he had sworn without fear, asked for the robe, and Xerxes was coming to be of every kind, because he wanted not to make the gift in accordance with nothing else, but out of fear of Amestris, lest by her, who even previously was guessing what was being done, to be found out to be doing thus. And rather he was offering cities and abundant gold, as well as an army, which no one was to rule other than that one, and the armies a very Persian gift. Yet since he could not produce persuasion, he gave the robe, and she, who was greatly rejoicing at the gift, was wearing and glorifying in it. Herodotus 9, 108-10. According to Dr. Philip Wagenbaum, in these narratives, there's a reoccurring motif. A father selects a bride for his son, but ends up having an affair with her. The relationship is later exposed when she presents an item belonging to the man. In Genesis, Judah's signet and staff take the place of Xerxes' robe. As mentioned in Herodotus' account of Babylonian traditions, it appears the biblical author blended elements from both the Babylonian ritual prostitution tale and the story of Xerxes' infatuation with his daughter-in-law. Whether this account was drawn from Herodotus or is just a common motif from Babylonian tradition that found its way into the biblical stories in Genesis, I'm not certain. But I find this source very interesting to ponder. Ancient Near Eastern conclusion. The story of Judah and Tamar is a particularly intriguing episode in the book of Genesis 38. In this narrative, Tamar, the widow of two of Judah's sons, disguises herself as a prostitute to seduce Judah, her father-in-law, in order to ensure her lineage after her husband died without leaving her any children. There are several mythical and cultural antecedents and parallels that might have influenced or share similarities with this narrative. Sacred prostitution. In some ancient Near Eastern cultures, there was a practice of sacred prostitution associated with fertility cults. While the Bible does not depict Tamar's actions as a religious rite, the themes of fertility and lineage are central to the story. Levirate marriage. As mentioned earlier, the practice of levirate marriage, where a man was expected to marry his deceased brother's widows if the brother died without offspring, was prevalent in several ancient cultures. The story of Judah and Tamar can be seen as a critique or exploration of this practice, especially when the expected social norms are not followed. Disguise and deception. Themes of disguise and deception are common in ancient myths. For instance, in Mesopotamian myths, the goddess Ishtar descends to the underworld by disguising herself. Similarly, in Greek mythology, Zeus often took on different forms to approach mortals. Tamar's use of disguise to achieve her ends echoes such themes. Justice and retribution. The story can also be seen in light of ancient themes of justice and retribution. Tamar is vindicated when Judah acknowledges his wrongdoing, and this theme of the marginalized securing justice is recurrent in many ancient myths. Ancestor narratives. In various cultures, stories about the ancestors of a tribe or nation often contain elements of intrigue, conflict, and resolution, which serve to explain the origins and characteristics of that group. The story of Judah and Tamar, which culminates in the birth of Perez, an ancestor of King David, and according to the New Testament, Jesus Christ, fits this mold. Divine intervention and fate. While not overtly stated, there's an underlying theme in the story that suggests a larger divine plan or fate at work. This is a common motif in ancient myths, where gods or fate intervene in human affairs to ensure a particular outcome. Dream on. In conclusion, we see clearly how the author of Genesis was imitating the David succession narrative, and some might even posit the author is the same. This evidence suggests fiction for the Genesis 38 narrative. But if there is any historical realities mentioned, could it be that Herodotus plays a significant role in giving the details of Babylonian prostitutes with that wild Xerxes story? Next up is Joseph the Dreamer, and one who wore the coat of many colors. We will try to unravel his mythical antecedents from the ancient world. Please subscribe, like, comment, and join our family by becoming a patron of MythVision and a YouTube member. Until next time, we are MythVision.